what is a greenhouse gas? Well, the big question that we would like to try to answer is, what is the difference between nitrogen and carbon dioxide? They're both colorless, odorless gases. We know that nitrogen does not absorb infrared radiation and carbon dioxide does. Okay? So before we can answer that question, you need to have some concept of molecular shapes. This is a review of the POGIL activity, and also I'm going to tell you some different terms that the POGIL activity didn't use that you may have heard in some other chemistry class. Or if you are going to be a science major in college, these are some words that may come up. Okay? So in the POGIL activity was on molecular shapes, and but in most books called this concept of the shape of a molecule VSEPR, VSEPR, the VSEPR model. VSEPR stands for Valence Shell Electron Pair Repulsion Model. Okay, the VSEPR model is Valence Shell Electron Pair Repulsion Model. What does that mean? This model came from experimental evidence that showed that certain shapes of molecules are found. The model is constructed in which the shapes of other molecules can be predicted. So what that means is by looking at the X-ray crystallography shapes data of molecules, it was found that different molecules tend to fall into certain shapes, predictable. And based on this model, you can predict the shapes of other molecules just by knowing the Lewis structure of the molecule. So what does this mean? Valence shell. Those are the electrons in the outer shell of an atom. And the electrons in the outer shell exist in a molecule exist as pairs, and because they're of like charge, it's energetically favorable to have two electrons in the same region, because those two electrons will have opposite spin, which we didn't talk about, but that's a fact. Because of that, the two electrons can be close to each other, but beyond that, electrons are going to be as far apart around the atom as possible. So that's where we get this electron pair repulsion model. The geometries of these molecules are going to be such that the electrons that are on that central atom in a particular molecule are going to be as far apart in space as possible. All right? And so if a molecule has more than one central atom, then if you're going to study the 3D shape, then you just look at each individual atom by itself and kind of build the shape up around it, and then that kind of gives you an overall picture of the molecule. All right, so what we're doing here is we're moving from the two-dimensional Lewis structure model to a more accurate three-dimensional picture of the molecule, and you should have gotten that in that POGIL activity. Okay, in the POGIL activity, you should have learned about something called electron domains. Okay, electron domains. I'm going to write it right here. Electron domains. Regions around an atom where electrons can be found. Okay. So the rules for determining what's called the number of electron domains and the geometries that match those electron domains, it's also called the electronic geometry. Okay, so in order to figure out the electronic geometry of any given molecule, the electronic geometry is telling you where those pairs of electrons, whether they be bonding pairs or non-bonding pairs, reside on the central atom. So non-bonding pairs count as one region or one domain. Bonding pairs count as one region or one domain. Those words, regions or domains, are used interchangeably. It depends on the book, but it's the same concept. And then multiple bonds, of course, count as one region or one domain, which is what you learned in the POGIL activity. So the actual electronic geometry of a particular molecule is based on the total number of regions of high electron density on the central atom, called domains in the POGIL activity, called regions of high electron density in most other textbooks. All right, and there's basically 5 different electronic arrangements, or 5 different electron domains that are possible. And in your POGIL activity, you should have seen these. This in the situation where A is the central atom and you have 2 regions of electron density or 2 electron domains, that geometry is going to be linear. That they're going to be as far apart in space as possible. If you have 3, it's going to be trigonoplanar. 4, it's tetrahedral. And we aren't going to cover this in detail in this class, but if you have 5, it's called trigonal bipyramidal, or if you have 6, it's called octahedral. I'm putting this in your notes just in case you do decide to be a science major. This information would be useful background information for you. In this class, I'm only going to hold you to these 3 basic types, but you should be aware there are other basic types. These 2 types of electronic geometry exist if you have 5 regions of high electron density or 6. And that would only occur if your particular central atom was large enough to have an expanded valence. Okay, remember when we were talking about Lewis structures? There are some exceptions to the octet rule where you have expanded valence on an atom, and in that case you can have an interesting electronic geometry as well. All right, I'm going through this very quickly because you should have covered all of this in your POGIL activity.